Hello everyone, welcome back to Grim Dawn. This is more of a general announcement video, so this is going to be you'll see these very occasionally for Grim Dawn. But you'll notice in the past 2 weeks I have not posted a class examination. Typically I posted them once, maybe twice a week. The reason why is because, as CrabTurtle2112 pointed out, it would be really nice to take my analyses of the individual classes to the next level and show gameplay of them in action. And they're absolutely correct, that would be very helpful, because talking about it from Grim Tools is one thing, but actually going into the game and showing off builds, showing how the class generally works, is a far more effective experience. So with that being said, I began last week to figure out what I wanted to do, how I was going to do this, etc. Set this all up, and how I wanted to format it in the future. And then over the weekend, I've been working on actually creating several characters that I can do this with. Now, originally, my original plan was to just do each class being one of the combinations of two masteries. I then realized that even though they're often described as being weaker or less effective, often, not always, but often, I've never actually done serious gameplay with individual masteries. So that's what I'm actually going to start that series on. Now, this particular episode is going to be a sort of halfway perspective on the individual soldier class. Now, this is just to confirm I've got no other masteries going on here. It is just soldier. Now, you may be wondering, Professor, what specifically makes single mastery characters theoretically weaker than an actual class? Well, primarily, attributes is what it basically comes down to. You see, each mastery, as you've noticed, can have up to 50 points put into it, and these points increase your stats. You can see here, I'm getting 1400 health, 500 energy, 250 physique, 175 cunning, and 75 spirit for being a level 50 soldier. And by only going a single mastery, you are limiting the amount of mastery levels you can have, right? I only can get 50 mastery levels here with the soldier. However, in actual practice of a lot of builds and a lot of classes, they don't use all 50 levels of the second class. So you're not actually, I'm going to just briefly go into here because I can undo the class, you're not actually losing out all 50 levels of Demolitionist, say, as an example. You're actually only losing, usually I would say most people don't really go past 20 a lot of the time, give or take, depending on the individual build. But most people don't throw the whole 50 levels in here, so you're only really missing out maybe about, I would be, in this particular case, very likely missing 80 physique, 80 cunning, and, etc. Whatever. I'm not going to do the head math right now because I'm having a brain fart. But you're not missing a ton of attributes. Now, another thing that I want to point out in this conversation about single mastery characters is how much of a problem that loss of attribute causes really depends on the individual mastery. I'm going to use the soldier as a prime example here. You see, when you're talking about attributes here, you've only got 3. You've got physique, which, as you can see here, primarily is in charge of your health and your regeneration. Very straightforward. Your cunning is increasing your quote-unquote physical damage types. Physical, pierce, bleed, internal trauma. There's a little bit of a health bonus there, but primarily the point of this is to increase your quote-unquote, again, physical type damage. And spirit increases your energy regeneration, your energy, and your quote-unquote magic damages, which would be the elements, chaos, vitality, Aether. I actually don't remember off the top of my head if poison is considered a physical or a magical. I believe spirit boosts poison acid. I might be wrong about that. I cannot remember for the life of me. I tried remembering before the video. I will probably look it up later on. I'm pretty sure spirit boosts this. Not 100% sure. So don't quote me on that. But how important these are really depends on your class, or in this particular case, your mastery. Now, the soldier mastery does not have much need for spirit. I might have 261 spirit here. That's entirely incidental. I've only put two or 3 points, actual attribute points, into spirit. You'll see I have 39 points available to adjust and use as I need. But I haven't put that many points in spirit, and the primary reason why is because soldiers don't do magic damage. Looking at their... Oops, let me just wander off for a brief minute. Looking at their skills, they all do physical type damages. Regular old physical damage, pierce, which you can find in... Not here. Nope. This is it. Internal trauma, bleeding... Where? One of these has pierce damage, I know. Where am I thinking of? Pierce damage. Here we go. Pardon me. I had a brain fart. Fighting form provides pierce damage. Obviously, if you use a gun, that's obviously enhanced. You've, of course, been seeing the bleeding damage here. We have physical internal trauma here. This offers bleed. This bleeds. It's all physical type damages, with the sole exception of Discord, the modification to Cadence, which turns it into elemental damage. Ignoring this one crystal, it's 100% physical type damages, so you need Cunning, not Spirit, to enhance your damage output as a soldier. Now, what does this mean overall? This means you can basically ignore putting attribute points in spirits. I mentioned earlier that I put a couple of points into spirit. This is purely for jewelry. Jewelry typically has, as you can see with the Herald's Ward here, which I happen to have equipped at this moment, required spirit 176. My spirit, that was way before, that was level 35. I've gone up 15 levels, put points into the soldier mastery, etc. Even these Leovinus' rings, 51 spirit. This is about the only need for spirit that the soldier has, and I have 260 spirit right now. I'm very likely not going to need any more spirit to equip any more relevant jewelry for the soldier mastery, alright? It's just not very likely. So going back to the... Actually, we're going to sit down the attributes. So all I really need is Cunning and Physique. Now, another thing that makes the soldier more easily managed as an individual mastery is, in fact, one key skill, one key passive. Military conditioning. This sort of will make up for a relative loss of attribute increases from a second mastery, because instead of having to put more attribute points into physique, you can just up military conditioning and increase that, along the way. Now, I haven't yet put points into military conditioning. I've been setting up a couple of other things skill-wise. I'll talk about that in a hot minute. But this is something I intend on picking up later on in the game. I'm thinking I'll probably start putting points into this at about level 70, level 75 maybe. It really depends on when I'm really going to need that physique. And this will help compensate a lot for the quote-unquote loss of attribute points from a second mastery, and quite frankly, I don't even need the quote-unquote there. You do technically have lower attributes as a single mastery character. Again, it typically ranges between 50 and 100 points lost in usual cases. It really depends upon the individual class, though. But more to the point, military conditioning will really help balance that out quite nicely, so you can put whatever remaining attribute points you need into Cunning, right? So you can ignore Spirit completely, or almost completely. There is a minimum you'll want to hit, so you can slap on the best jewelry. And then just go entirely whole hog into... Well, not entirely whole hog, but you can put a lot more points into Cunning, because military conditioning will be artificially increasing your physique without you needing to put points into them. And the reason why I'm waiting till later on in the game is because that physique increase is a percentage. So the longer I wait, the more of a jump in physique I'll have as I boost this. Early on in the game, military conditioning doesn't really go that far. We're talking percentages here. This is a percentage increase. And earlier in the game, your stats are lower, your physique is lower, your health is lower. it's not as impactful, but later on in the game, it's really substantially impactful. And there are a couple of other skills that I wanted first that would help me survive more in the short term than anything else. Again, I'll get to that in a minute. Now, the reason why I wanted to really start with single masteries is, one, they're really not talked about, despite the fact that some of them have great potential, such as the soldier here has some fantastic potential, especially for newer players, which I'll get into in a bit. Secondly, it's really refreshing at least for some of these masteries, to just be able to go whole hog and go in the way you want to, right? A lot of class I'm using, by the way, I've been referring to class and mastery as separate entities. I define a class mentally as being two masteries together, whereas a mastery is the mastery itself by itself without any other kind of secondary mastery in here. So this is what I call a mastery character as opposed to a class character, which would have two masteries involved here. That's my specific definitions that I've been running with. If I've been confusing you, I apologize for not explaining that earlier. But back to the point. Some masteries are better at this than other ones. This is fairly obvious. As I've discussed with the tier list of individual masteries and of specific classes, there are some inherent pros and cons to each. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that any one mastery or any one class isn't viable to be used to reach the end game. They all can be, if you build them right, if you have the right equipment, which takes a little bit of luck, and if you're smart about it. That's all fine. But there are levels of difficulty to this depending on what you're going to run with. So when I do this series, you will eventually see me talk about the level 100 soldier and the various builds that I've experimented with the soldier, which is also why I'm not doing a complete rush through. You'll notice I have the Leovinus' rings, but I don't have anything else that boosts experience on, really, except for, I briefly had the Explorer's set equipped. I had that equipped for 20 levels, and I've got the Flame Silk sash for the 5% experience gain here. I was very lucky with this belt. I get some nice resistances out of this. Bleeding and Chaos are pretty big. Pierce is pretty big because for some reason I'm cursed and I can never naturally find a lot of Pierce resistance in my life. I don't know why I have a problem with that. It's pretty individual as far as I can tell. And of course I've got a medal that increases experience. Yay. But I'm not really going whole hog with, like, constant experience boost potions. I did use a couple of those early on to hasten the early game and get me to somewhere where I can, more accurately talk about what I'm doing. But it's not like I'm running these experience potions constantly 100% of the time. And just, really going hog on that, right? There are a couple of reasons why. First off, for at least the individual masteries, I have never seriously played the individual masteries. I've never played individual mastery characters very extensively. Each of the new ones, I'm actually going to go really quickly to the mastery class. One of my early characters was just a pure soldier, but that was before I really knew what I was doing. It turned out terribly, scrapped the character, just basically stuck primarily to regular classes. I did, with each release of these, do a single mastery of the Inquisitor, Necromancer, and Oathkeeper, to some extent, up to about level 50, so I could get a feel for them before I put them together with a class. This was way back in the day when I knew most of what I was doing, but I was still learning. Even to this day, I'm still learning new things about Grim Dawn, which is why I love playing it even to this day, years later. But anyways, passing over that, I did do brief single masteries of those three, and a brief stint as a very bad individual soldier, and now I'm going to go through each of the individual masteries, do it right, and talk about the pros and cons of doing single mastery of these, the builds that you can really pull off with these that maybe you couldn't with a class, etc. Now, when I talk about these individual masteries, and more specifically the equipment, I'm going to be talking about the equipment very specific to that mastery. For example, you will see me when I get to level 100, you will hear me talk about the Mutant Bludgeon. This is very specifically a soldier weapon. It only increases soldier skills, and I will be talking about it as a result of that. But I will not be talking about something that improves skills for two different masteries, because honestly, typically these weapons are designed for a specific class in mind, and while I'll probably mention some of the more standout examples, I'm not going to be talking very heavily about them, because they're not necessarily quite as useful as something as focused as the Mutant Bludgeon of Ruin. For example, let's take an example of, say, Incendiary Shoulder Guards. Puts 2 points towards 2 different skills. I can't remember off the top of my head. It's Bursting Round and I think Fire Strike? No, I'm sorry. The Shoulder Guards are Inferno and Bursting Round, I believe. Inquisitor and Arcanist, if I'm remembering that correctly and I'm not thinking of the helmet. I could be. Anyways, back to the point. That's just flat 2 points in each of those. And while using that as a single mastery Arcanist or a single mastery Inquisitor could boost that particular skill by 2 points, unless you got a monster infrequent drop like that also increased something else for your individual mastery, let's say Incendiary Shoulder Guards that also increases, say, Endless Flame, for 2 points, then often you'll find something else, like this badge here, which you'll notice gives me +2 to Force Wave. You'll find something like this that's generally going to be better, right? There are certain exceptions, and again, I will talk about those exceptions when I get this character to 100, and I can show you a level 94 version of those monster infrequents and talk about, the pros and cons of those. But primarily I'll be focusing on things like this Mutant Bludgeon, which is designed, again, pretty much exclusively for soldiers, with whatever else you're doing there, right? So that's where I'm coming from with this. So the soldier's going to be the first, and I kind of wanted to do a conversation. I'm going to run through a single Shattered Realm here. I think I actually need to run this quest really quick first. But I did want to run through and talk about the Soldier Mastery character at a halfway point as a sort of perspective on how this plays in the early game, things you're going to probably have some troubles with, things you're not really going to have trouble with. Now, these enemies are roughly matched with my level. You'll notice they're level 51, so these are a fairly decent fight for me here. And I'm just going to activate Overguard here. Now, my skill setup is more specifically geared towards the set, the very specific legendary set, Markovian's Bastion, which is the only legendary set that only increases soldier stuff, and I wanted to use Markovian's Bastion at level 100, pardon the choking on saliva, at level 100 to exemplify the most focused build for soldiers, and then talk about other builds from there. Yay, verily, for these random pieces of equipment I don't need. Anyways, back to the point. So I am specifically building my skills right now, at least temporarily, towards that set. Again, I will be showcasing a couple of other builds. It'll be a lovely time. But before I do a Shattered Realm, let's talk very briefly about the skills of the soldier and things that I've noticed playing a serious and semi-pre-planned soldier build, quasi-improv. There were certain skills that I wanted that I've already acquired, and certain skills that I didn't care about until I decided I needed those later on. Now, let's start off with what I started building in regards to the future of this character, with the intention of equipping Markovian's Bastion as kind of the standout set, right? Now, Markovian's Bastion increases, very specifically, Markovian's Advantage, Blitz, Overguard, and Menhir's Bulwark. So I already knew ahead of time that this character was going to be a bit more defensive-minded, which is fine. I prefer my characters like that, in all honesty. So that was fine. But it also allowed me to really come to grips with the how am I going to incorporate sufficient amounts of damage on this character? Because obviously I can't run through the game just running on Menhir's Bulwark and just assume that it's all going to go peachy keen for me. Well, obviously, first off, I wanted Markovian's Advantage, but my actual opening move at the beginning of the game, up until I got to, I think, level 15 or so. Yeah, about level 15. I put all my points into Force Wave at the start. The reason why is because Force Wave is a hell of a lot more effective at dealing with Kizog than Markovian's Advantage or a lot of other skills, and I didn't want to try to just rush to Blitz, because by the time I got to Blitz, it wouldn't be quite as strong as Force Wave would be by the same token, because you only need 1 point to access Force Wave, but you need 10 to access Blitz. So I knew, as I've mentioned before, I know I needed something that would help damage Kizog, clear out, his flunkies. Force Wave was the move, obviously. Once I hit level 10, no, not even 10, once I hit about level 15, I pulled the points out of Force Wave and went into Blitz. Now, there's a couple of reasons I prefer Blitz over Force Wave. You can stick with Force Wave if you really want. I'll talk about why I would want to in a bit. But Blitz just allows me to run through the game a little bit faster. I can bounce from enemy group to enemy group, and in the Shattered Realm, that makes quite a difference. Right? We're actually going to have a conversation about that. Are you going to let me in now? Yeah. I have to do the cults thing anyways. In that case, let me talk more about the skills. I keep forgetting that he doesn't let you in until you've talked to all the cult people. I'm actually going to go with Dreeg, because there's fewer side quests for Dreeg than there is for the other two. So in terms of favor, Dreeg is the best one. But that's, neither here nor there right now. Anyways, back to the point. Furthermore, I just like their quest setups better anyways. So I knew, Blitz was going to be the way to go here. There we go. You're probably going to give me, pretty useless item. So Blitz, I can kind of zip through the game a little bit faster, because I can just blitz from enemy group to enemy group. And although it doesn't have the range of Force Wave, it still does about the same levels of damage, roughly speaking. You've got this really fantastic amount of damage. You're hitting potentially multiple enemies. You're knocking down people. You grab Blindside later on. You're reducing their defensive ability. You're slapping even more people. It's just a magical time. And again, of course, Markovian's Bastion, or whatever it's called. What is this called? Markovian's Bastion, I was actually correct. I had it written down on a piece of paper, and I forgot about my paper for a minute there. But anyways, this is also being increased by Markovian's Bastion later on down the line. And again, it's one of my favorite skills to take into the Shattered Realm. So it's just something that I've become very used to using. It's one of my favorite skills. And it's just a really rip-roaring good time. So with that being said, my next move was to grab Markovian's Advantage. By the way, sorry I keep flipping through windows. I recently got a new mouse, and I've had to readjust where my buttons are, so I'm still getting used to that. I actually got it in the day before this episode recorded. Pardon me. So Markovian's Advantage was next, because not only did Markovian's Bastion increase this as well, so I knew I would want it, but this also happens to be a really nice low energy, actually it doesn't use any energy, but a nice cheap way of doing single target damage, very impressive single target damage, and works really well with Blitz. Blitz is a bit more of an AoE, and you'll be relying on it very heavily in the early game once you get Blitz. I went to Markovian's Advantage, so that way I could do a large amount of single target damage to heroes, bosses, etc., without having to use any energy, because in the early game, obviously, you're not putting that many points into Spirit if you're putting any in at all, so your energy in the early game is kind of low. Even now at level 50, my energy is a bit low. I've been relying very heavily on energy potions to get me through a lot of fights. That's fine. But Markovian's Advantage was a really cheap way of getting single target damage without spending any of the energy that Blitz would be needing. Now, Overguard was also going to be useful ahead of time before even getting Markovian's Bastion for the fairly obvious reason of this will help keep you alive, right? Which is fantastic. Always up for being kept alive better, and Overguard is really great at this. So Overguard was just really nice for that, and then I just basically zoomed up here, I grabbed Blindside, and then I went right to Menhir's Bulwark. Now, I am a big advocate for getting early exclusives. because they make an impressive amount of difference. I mean, you can see right here with Menhir's Bulwark, I'm getting extra retaliation damage, which I'm not currently using, but I will in the future. I'm regenerating a ton of health. My all healing effects are increased by 15%. This includes health potions. I'm getting damage absorption, and I'm just getting a flat 331 physical damage increase. That's fantastic, right? Great time. And then after that, after Menhir's Bulwark, I wanted to accentuate Markovian's advantage, so I started going into Cadence. And that's, you can see that that's just, been going off. I'm almost done with it at level 50. My plans in the future for this build, I use the term build loosely here, because this is the improv. My planned part of the build, as I've indicated and alluded to, were Markovian's advantage, Blitz, Overguard, and Menhir's Bulwark. That was the planned part of the build. This took me until I believe I was level 38 when I actually finished the planned part of my build. And then I started doing the improv part, and I went into Cadence for single target damage that I can also obviously splash out with AoE damage with Deadly Momentum. This is just really fantastic because it affects all attacks while active, including Blitz, including Markovian's advantage. Cadence is just a lovely time, and it allows me to really keep up with my damage, because before I started, don't worry about you, you worry about you, but before I was working on Cadence, I was having a bit of a hard time doing damage, because obviously, Blitz being my main form of damage output, and Markovian's advantage, while being nice, isn't a constant thing. It only is used slightly over a quarter of your attacks. Damage wasn't exactly forthcoming. I could survive really well. Between Menhir's Bulwark and Overguard, surviving was not the problem. The problem was I wasn't doing enough damage. So obviously I needed something to supplement that, and Cadence, as you saw from that last fight, was just an absolutely fantastic move for that particular purpose. I think I'm going to start moving around now and actually going into the Shattered Realm here. But Cadence was definitely a huge pickup in terms of damage output. Deadly Momentum, very specifically, is a huge boon in terms of damage output. So, and you can see it triggering right there. And you can see I'm not really having any trouble doing damage. My attack speed was reduced there by somebody. That's fine. But you can absolutely see really nice amounts of damage output here. And I'm not really struggling for damage, primarily because of Deadly Momentum and Cadence, right? I'm just going to go ahead and prematurely activate. I activated that way too early. We're going to have a bit of a problem here. We're actually going to go over here and get rid of these. So, you'll notice, I'm not taking too much damage here, despite the fact that I'm attracting way too much attention. But, yes, Cadence is definitely a huge move in terms of acquiring more damage output. And Overguard, between Overguard and Menhir's Bulwark, that's really going to help keep me alive. Beyond Cadence, I might go for Zohan's technique. I'm kind of leaning towards doing so. It'll combo really well with Markovian's advantage, and more importantly, it'll combo really well with Cadence. And then, in terms of damage output abilities, that's probably all I'm going to be doing. It's at about that point, once I get Zohan's technique, if I decide to go for that, I'm not sure yet, that I intend on going into Menhir's Will, right? That's a nice passive healing. That's going to make me basically immortal. It's a mild exaggeration, but it will definitely go a huge way to keeping me alive throughout the game, especially when combined with Menhir's Bulwark. After Menhir's Will, I'll probably go for either... and you'll notice there that I ran out of energy. I had to use an energy potion. I've been needing that pretty consistently. It's the only downside of ignoring your spirit, really. But considering you do have access to infinite energy potions, it's just whenever you need one, you can just buy some. It's not a huge problem. It's just something you've got to keep an eye on. But back to the point. Yes, I do intend on going into either... what is that called again? Military conditioning, that's right. I almost called it decorated soldier, but I knew that was wrong. Or I will go into Counter-Strike. which I do want to get into eventually. Now, you'll notice that once I'm done with Cadence, I'm really not talking about any other evolving skills. They're all individual skills, they're all passives. There's two reasons for this. One is, one of the big problems with single mastery characters is you have all of these free, spare points that you would normally put into the mastery levels of your second mastery. Like I said, this approximates to about 20 that you now just have freely sitting there to be put into skills. And you don't need that many skills. The only, you'll notice, active skills that I've really been talking about here so far are Blitz and Overguard, and everything else I've talked about is pretty much passive, and that's actually not a bad thing. Complex builds do not necessarily mean effective builds, and you really don't need like 12 or you don't need half a dozen abilities, honestly. I think a lot of veterans will agree with me that having 6 or so activatable abilities is not necessarily ideal. It depends on the individual combination, of course, but you don't necessarily need 12 abilities. You can run a really sweet game off of just running passive abilities, and that's pretty much what the soldier mastery character is looking to do. You're running a lot off of passive abilities, and you can see here, I don't even have all of the passive abilities that do, increased damage, like Decorated Soldier here, which increases my damage output rather substantially by the end of it, and I don't have that at all, and I'm still doing impressive amounts of damage here. Like I said, I can go into Decorated Soldier for even more damage without even necessarily having to put that many points in. What is it, 10 points? It's 8 points. So I could also, if I really wanted to, go into Field Command, specifically Squad Tactics, and increase my attack speed, increase my damage output even further, which would really help Cadence, by the way. And if I was playing with friends, also increase their stats as well, and just absolutely decimate pretty much any sap that gets in my way, right? And all without necessarily needing to invest a ton of points into whatever, right? So these are all possibilities. I'll be experimenting around with these as time goes on. Of course, to some extent, this will also depend on what other pieces of equipment I have equipped, but overall, that's my rough plan. Again, this is the improv part of my build, so I'll be making this up as I go along. Again, partially depending on my equipment, partially depending on what I find most effective. Again, I have not played a single mastery character seriously ever. I've played casual ones for the intention of just experimenting and looking at what the individual mastery did more as a learning experience than anything else, but I've never actually intended to get anything more than my very first single mastery character up to level 100, and even then, because that was so early on in my Grim Dawn experience, I didn't have as much of an idea of what I was doing as I do now. But now that I know what I'm doing, I know where I'm going, and I know what I want out of the character, I'm actually pulling this off fairly nicely. And frankly, this has surprisingly been one of my more simply effective early game characters, because I can bust out all of these. This is going to be a bit of a problem here. Just because I have all of these passive skills available to me. Now, there are a couple of masteries that I anticipate will be problematic in terms of that. I don't know why I bothered using Overguard here. I really don't think I needed to. I wasn't too worried about the timer. This was mostly as an to sort of demonstrate. Again, I also don't have the potentially maximum amount of damage I could bust out here, so keep that in mind. But don't worry about the timer. This was for demonstration purposes. I didn't come in here expecting to beat the timer. Doesn't make a difference. And you'll notice I just activated Overguard. I stopped taking damage. I started healing. Right? It's surprisingly a beautifully safe and yet still effectively damaging time. Right, you'll notice that I really haven't had any troubles with anything except for energy. I've had to, fiddle around a little bit dodging attacks for brief moments in time, but they were never long moments of time. And they were mostly because my resistances are good overall, but you can see a couple of gaps in my resistances. You could see specifically my Aether damage. My Aether resistance here is only 35% as an example, so the fact that I got Venarius here is a bit unfortunate, to describe it kindly, but not a huge problem. Even with this, with such low Aether resistance, you can notice that I'm still doing fairly well. I don't really have any huge problems here. I'm actually going to be able to kill him without needing to retreat at all, again, despite having relatively weak resistance to Aether damage. And again, partially because, I know I'm going to just clean it up there. Partially because he was, half his damage output is physical and I have nice high armor. But even with the Aether damage, there really wasn't a huge problem there. So, yeah, I have to say, if you've never played or you've given up on individual, a single mastery character, I'll talk about constellations in a hot minute. If you've given up on single mastery characters, start with the soldier. I think the soldier is probably the easiest single mastery to play. I am keeping that in mind as I go through this because, again, as I've pointed out, the soldier offers a lot of... That's actually a really nice shield. Soldier offers a lot of benefits that overcome the shortcomings of single mastery characters, so it's not quite as much of a problem leveling or even sticking with a single mastery soldier as opposed to single mastery other characters. I actually am on the side working on a single mastery demolitionist character, and I'm playing that one specifically in multiplayer, so I've only been playing the single mastery demolitionist with family and friends. And there are a couple of reasons for that I want to actually get into, because this video is going to be more than just the single mastery soldier. I also wanted to talk about single mastery characters in general as a sort of groundwork. The soldier just happened to be the first one that I decided to tackle, partially because it's on the top of the list and I wanted to go sequentially, but also because the soldier happens to have the easiest time, again, due to military conditioning and being able to ignore the spirit attribute almost wholesale. But let's take a look at the Demolitionist really quick. The Demolitionist has a couple of very serious problems that I anticipate making it more difficult to run a single mastery Demolitionist character than the Soldier. One is that the Demolitionist does not have any exclusive skills. Now, that doesn't sound like too much of a problem until you realize that the Demolitionist has nothing that equates to the sheer power of either Menhir's Bulwark or Olorin's Rage. I mean, you level up Olorin's Rage, and that is an absolutely staggering boost to your damage output. In the same way that Menhir's Bulwark is a staggering boost to your survivability. Yeah, Demolitionist has none of this. The closest thing you can get is Olzwin's Chosen, which only affects 3 stinking skills. So there is going to be a problem. Now, the reason why Demolitionist exists, basically, is to be used with a class. Demolitionist is sort of a jack-of-all-trades mastery that can do a lot of different things, all with a fire or lightning twist. Some physical and internal trauma damage is obviously thrown in there, but for the most part, it's more about fire and being general purpose. It has response to pretty much everything, but then it also doesn't specialize in anything except specifically fire damage. This is actually a problem for single mastery, because unlike the soldier, who I've just been, rigging up to be fairly survivable and adding in cadence for really impressive damage output, again, I might do Zohan's technique, I might not, I'm not sure. But, soldier, you can take in some very specific directions. You really can't take the Demolitionist in a specific direction because it doesn't do specific directions. It has a bunch of things that can respond well to enemies, and it's got, well, I suppose if you could call it a specific direction, you could just call throwing stuff a direction, because it's got 4 throwables. But if you don't consider that a specific direction, and I personally don't, it's a bit more of a tough time because you're so generalized that you don't have an ideal answer for any one situation, but you have an answer for a situation, right? As opposed to the soldier, who does physical damage and doesn't have much of a response to anything that resists that, right? But the Demolitionist, you're resistant to fire? Alright, let me bust out, say, Canister Bomb, let's do some piercing damage to you. Should work. Oh, Fire Strikers have physical damage and have fire damage. Alright, let's, I'll still be doing some moderate damage to you. Right? That's the general idea there. Now, there are problems with that, obviously, that I'm going to get into with the when I talk about the individual Demolitionist mastery, but I'm not going to worry about that now. We'll talk about the Demolitionist again in their own video. But this is really nice. This is a really nice introduction to single mastery characters. If you've never done them before, I know some people have played them extensively. There are definitely people out there way better at single mastery characters than I am. This is my first serious experience with one, and frankly, I'm going to admit that this is actually a much better time than I was expecting. I came into this with relatively low expectations, to be fair, but this is turning out really well. But I can also see I've gotten the Demolitionist with friends to level 35, and I can definitely see holes in that character that I won't be able to plug because it's single mastery. There are going to be problems with that character in the future, and I already know what those problems are going to be, and while I'm prepared for them and I'm going to just have to deal with them in my own way, I can't plug those holes completely. Again, we'll talk about that when the Demolitionist hits level 50 and I can talk about some of these problems, but the Soldier's a really nice time. If you are looking to introduce a friend to Grim Dawn, get them to play Single Mastery Soldier, because this is a really nice, straightforward time, because you cannot... Everything... I was about to phrase it oddly. Everything the Soldier does, with the sole exception of Discord here, everything the Soldier does is interconnected. You can't goof this. It's impossible. Everything is useful here. Scars of Battle. Okay, it keeps you from dying quite as easily, right? Veterancy allows you to regenerate your health between fights better. You're using a shield. Shield training helps you stay alive using your shield. You know, it's got all these incredible things. You want to do more damage? Cadence, fantastic. You want to be slapping people from a distance? Force Wave, right? It's got a response. It's got a simplified response to everything. Very straightforward character. It does physical damage. You can sum it up in that way, and everyone knows what you're talking about. You've got good old Decorated Soldier here. You've got Oleron's Rage here, if you really want to go into that. You know, it's not got any kind of response for anything that resists physical heavily, other than the Constellations, which is all... I can't speak today, which I'll talk about in a bit, but... You know, it's a beautifully straightforward class. It's got a lot of passive skills. Laws of passive skills that it can use, that you can actually channel those points that you would normally be spending in another mastery. You can put them into Soldier passive skills and have an absolutely delightful time. And again, you don't need a ton of skills to make this work, so somebody that you're trying to introduce to Grim Dawn, I've got 3 active skills, and that's probably all I'm going to stick with. I don't intend on picking... I might, like I said, I'll probably pick up Counter-Strike, which will be something I'll want to activate in the future, but I don't need to. I don't necessarily have to if I don't want to. There are other options. I could go for an addition... I could pick up an additional passive skill instead if I really wanted to, but I don't intend on going into Warcry. I don't intend on going into Blade Arc. I probably won't go into Force Wave, but that could change. But overall, it's... Yeah, it's been a really fantastic experience so far, and I really anticipate this character being one of the better late-game characters, compared to future single mastery characters who I think some of them will struggle with the late game, including Demolitionist. Now, there are a couple of other masteries I wanted to talk briefly about as to whether or not they will be really effective as a single mastery. The Occultist is, for me, an interesting future prospect. I am curious to see how this goes down, because you can basically divide the Occultist into sort of 2 different kinds of builds. Pets and not pets. Yes, you could theoretically do a hybrid by throwing in, I would say, just the Hellhound, because you don't do enough elemental damage to justify the familiar in a single mastery Occultist. But the Hellfire here from the Hellhound can in fact boost you, especially if you run Sigil of Consumption, and with all the spare points that you've got from being a single mastery, why the hell wouldn't you go with Sigil of Consumption? That's a conversation for a different time. Also, the sheer availability of Monster Infrequents for Occultists, specifically from the Cult of Cthon enemies that start appearing around the Blood Grove onwards, that can be really effective. You know, you just get yourself one nice morning... I'm sorry, it's technically a scepter. A Bloodsworn Scepter of whatever, and you're going to be using that weapon for probably a good long time. Potentially hugely effective. But, yeah, absolutely. I am looking forward to this. The flaw that I can see coming out of the Occultist as compared to the Soldier is probably going to be the attributes. As really unified as the occultist is, the occultist probably almost matches the soldier in terms of internal efficiency. Like I said, the soldier, with the exception of Discord here, everything here works with everything else. You could build a soldier with your eyes closed, and it would turn out effective. You can almost do the same thing with the cultist. The only standout here is the familiar, and I'll even argue Curse of Frailty to some extent. Vulnerability, you don't really have a whole lot of access to elemental damage. It can still work, because you're still doing fire damage, which is nice and all, but not the biggest of deals. So this... Whoa. Pardon me for the throat noise. But Curse of Frailty I could see being a little less effective than normal in a single mastery occultist, but the familiar, that's elemental damage. The only elemental damage you're doing is fire, and Hellfire is better for that. You would never want to summon familiar in a single mastery occultist, but beyond that, I can see this being a really good time, except in the attributes. I really think that this is going to have a hard time in the attribute portion of the deal, even ignoring cunning, which I anticipate will probably be my stopgap for that problem, but I'm going to have a little less physique than maybe I would ideally want. Now I'm going to be counterbalancing this with Blood of Dreeg and Sigil of Consumption, obviously, both of which will help keep me alive, but it's definitely going to be very much teetering on the edge of death kind of experience, I expect, as I desperately drain health from my enemies as they're killing me rather rapidly. Again, I'll talk about the Demolitionist more when I get that to level 50. The Nightblade is also going to be interesting because, to some extent, they do have nice passives in Phantasmal Armor, Anatomy of Murder, and Merciless Repertoire, but now, how am I going to necessarily build this? This is a single mastery character that I'm really not sure about. They have a lot of... I'm pretty sure there's 2 sets that are more specifically geared towards the Nightblade, to the point of being exclusively Nightblade focused. And, of course, again, as I just mentioned, there's 2 different ways I can approach the Nightblade. I can go with Poison and Cold emphasis, or I can go with Bleed and Vitality. I'm probably going to go with the Poison Cold emphasis so I can utilize Lethal Assault as well as Night's Chill at their ideal best, which is Cold Poison, so I'll probably lean very heavily in that direction. But then that kind of leaves me with an excruciatingly specific build of dual-wielding Amarasta's Burst, Blade Burst, Veil of Shadow, probably run Pneumatic Burst, maybe run Shadow Strike, and definitely be running Blade Spirit, and probably not much else. If I run Ring of Steel, I'll probably convert it to cold damage, because that's what I'm going to be boosting over the pierce damage, right? And of course we've got bleed damage that I won't really care about, but I'm not sure how I'm going to approach that. It's going to be fairly interesting, but I'm kind of leaning towards a Poison Cold. But again, we're going to have the same problem with the Occultist, where it's going to be an attribute problem. And I'll have to deal with that in some way. But unlike the Occultist, who can pretty safely ignore Cunning, the Nightblade can't necessarily do that. Because there is a decent amount of... I've got access to piercing and regular physical damage, and while I'll probably try to ignore Cunning, there's going to be more of probably a balance between Spirit and Cunning, because I'll need a certain amount of Cunning to equip the weapons I need for Nightblade in the first place. So probably my physique will take a even more substantial hit for the Nightblade, and unlike the Occultist, who's got 2 self-healing options, Nightblade really doesn't. I believe Shadow Strike might, if I'm remembering correctly, yes, 3% of attack damage converted to health. Obviously, that'd be more at higher levels. But still, it's not exactly going to be as reliable as the constant healing generated from Sigil of Consumption, because this is going to be Stab, Pneumatic Burst, Pray I survive until the next stab. And while I'll be able to draw upon Phantasmal Armor to help with that, it's going to be fairly interesting. Again, I'll report back at level 50 for that one. The Arcanist, I do anticipate having a bit of an easier time, because this is basically the magic equivalent to a soldier. Instead of increasing physique, you've got a boost to spirit, which means you can take the points you would normally put into spirit and you can put them into physique and completely ignore cunning, because you have no physical damage types here. You've got all elemental damage and aether damage. That is 100% of the Arcanist's damage here. Other than ignoring Fabric of Reality, I'm pretty much golden to build whatever here. I've also got the advantage of Maven's Sphere of Protection. It's basically going to come down to, do I want to really emphasize fire and aether, or do I really want to emphasize elemental damage in general? Right? That's a conversation I'll have with myself later on, but I anticipate the Arcanist will be approximately as smooth and effective as the Soldier, simply by merit of the fact of inner focus plus not having any physical damage to remove my need for cunning, right? That's fine. Shaman is also going to be... Shaman's going to have similar problems, I think, to the Nightblade, where I've basically got this weird combination of magical and physical damage types, in terms of I've got electric and lightning and, to some extent, cold and vitality, and I've also got physical and bleeding and internal trauma as well, and I'm going to have to make a choice here, but that choice is almost going to have to exclusively be... well, is very heavily going to be skewed towards the magic side, because I've got Stormcaller's Pact. If I did run the physical side using Primal Bond, I would be almost certainly guaranteed to be using the Briarthorn, and I'd also be using the Primal Spirit, which I don't like as much anymore, because it only lives for 20 seconds, and that kind of kills me on the inside. Especially after having played the pet patch and remembering the good old days when it was permanent. But anyways, enough griping. This is also going to be a fairly interesting one, but I think this is another one that's going to have some serious attribute problems. It does have at least Wendigo Totem to heal if I decide to go in that direction, but again, there's not a whole lot of vitality boost here. There's just a bleeding boost. So it's going to be tough. I think the Shaman, surprisingly, is going to be one of the tougher ones. So I would actually say probably the toughest of the masteries to do individually, just by merit of that. The Inquisitor will be a fairly interesting time, but does have the advantage of Inquisitor Seal and Aura of Censure if I really wanted that, or Aura of Conviction, but Aura of Censure is my favorite. And Horn of Gandar to help confuse enemies and keep them off my case, and we've also got the self-heal from Word of Renewal. I'm not sure how this one's going to go out. Because again, it's going to be kind of like the Nightblade and the Shaman, where I've got, the Pierce and the physical damage normally, and then I've got the elemental damage that I can have access to instead. So this will be an interesting trip, but I think it'll be a little easier than the Shaman because there's a more consistent heal in terms of Word of Renewal than the Wendigo Totem, and I've got access to more damage absorption than the Shaman does, so that'll be really nice as well. The Necromancer, again, is going to be pretty much like the Arcanist, but without the benefit of the Spirit boost, so this is going to be basically, I imagine, is going to be a bit of a weaker version of Arcanist, with a bit more damage diversity. So on the one hand, while the Necromancer will struggle with attributes, unlike the Arcanist, who will have a problem with an entire faction of Ethereals, the Necromancer won't, because at least the Necromancer has access to vitality damage, which will offset that nicely. So it's going to be really interesting comparing the two in future and seeing, well, does the lack of trouble that the Necromancer has with Ethereals counterbalance the attribute problems that it's going to have compared to the Arcanist? I will be very interested in seeing how this goes down. And then finally, my anticipation of Oathkeeper. This is a bit of a wild card, because there's one skill that's completely useless, Resilience. I wouldn't say completely useless. Technically, this does affect your healing potions, but that's the only internal source of healing that the Oathkeeper has, and not something I intend on using. I may actually run... well, actually, I can run a couple of these different characters, but, obviously I'll be going into primarily physical and fire damage, I imagine, the first time, and then I'll respec at level 100 and see if I can make good Path of the 3 builds with single mastery Oathkeepers. That's a whole different conversation for a different day, but it should be fairly interesting. But yeah, so far, as a level 50 checkpoint, this is why I haven't done any class examinations. I've been spending a lot of free time building this, working towards this goal of getting every individual mastery and eventually every class to level 100 so I can show you what I'm talking about rather than just talking about it through Grim Tools. So I apologize for the delay. I actually created this level 50 checkpoint kind of video so you can not only be aware of where I'm at in progress of that, but also so that way I can kind of give you an update on, well, here's what I've found to be effective so far in the early game for these individual things, because I've never actually talked about the early to mid game for any of these. I've always focused on the late game, the end game, which granted is what a lot of people want to hear about, but newer players or people new to a specific mastery class may want to know what they want, may want some suggestions or some ideas on what the kinds of things are effective in the early to mid game. And I really haven't been offering that, and for that I apologize. One final note before I close out the video in terms of the soldier's equipment, and another reason why I really recommend this for newer players, if you're recommending this to a friend, is there is a fantastic amount of equipment available early on to soldiers that really will help you survive. The Mutant Bludgeon is actually a great example. I have personally found that I have been bouncing from progressively stronger Mutant Bludgeons for most of my gameplay with the soldier. Now, there have been brief moments of exception, but for the most part, I've just been jumping from Mutant Bludgeon to Mutant Bludgeon, primarily because, once again, they are somewhat specifically designed for soldiers, so a lot of the stats that these typically drop with are beneficial to you as a soldier, as a single mastery soldier. Now, I'm not using Force Wave in this particular instance because I've got other skills I want to focus on, and I'm using Blitz. But if you are a fan of Force Wave, this is absolutely amazing for you. I'm not choosing Blitz over Force Wave because Force Wave is bad or worse. I just prefer the speed of Blitz to the range of Force Wave. They achieve the exact same effect, it's just a different process, and I just personally prefer the movement boost, rushing to an enemy and slapping with my shield from Blitz. But Force Wave, again, achieves roughly the same idea, just at a distance version instead of a melee version running to the enemy. But yeah, this is absolutely a fantastic weapon, and newer players will have very little trouble throughout the game finding these to equip and utilize for most of the game. Now, the exception to this, I haven't gotten to this point yet, and I will talk about that in a future video. I might do a level 75 version, depending on how long it takes me to get to there. Depends on how much free time I've got. But I also want to point out that I'm going to have a bit of a problem, I suspect, upgrading my weapon here in the Forgotten Gods expansion. Now, I've recently completed the main campaign with this character and got to about a third of the way through the Malmoth content. I'm going sequentially so I can actually really experiment and understand this individual mastery play on a deeper level, because, again, I've never done this seriously. But so far, I haven't really had any problems with that, but that's going to be... I'm going to have a lot of ethereals, there's going to be a lot of ethereal mutants, I'm going to have pretty free access to even more of these, but that's going to stop very suddenly for the most part in the Forgotten Gods content, and that's going to be very interesting for me to go through. Now, I could just rift somewhere and farm for these, but I'm not going to, just so I can see, what the actual struggle is going to be like. I'm very curious about that. But for newer players, or for people who just want to play this regularly, whatever, whether you just are new to Soldier and want to do a single mastery Soldier to just get a really good feel for it, the fact that you have, for most of the game, a pretty steady supply of increasingly powerful versions of this weapon is really nice. That's quite the effective thing for you to be running here for most of the game, and you're really not going to have a problem finding equipment in general that boosts soldier skills. You've got the helmets and the chest pieces from the Flesh Warp Troll people. I can't remember off the top of my head what they're called, but you've got those. You've got a variety. I know there are some pieces of equipment in Forgotten Gods that boost soldier skills. They're just not as specific as the Mutant Bludgeon is. And you've also got a fairly reliable group of equipment here. I'm actually going to go to the smith here to exemplify this, but, you can waltz all the way... No, what am I doing? Waltz all... Hello? Oh, actually, that was kind of where we wanted to be. You can very easily just forge and set up a complete set of these with a late game character, and you can have, for a good 20 levels easily, if not longer, an excellent set of equipment that boosts your damage output and helps really keep you alive. The Guardsman set is an excellent set. I've actually run this all the way to level 45 and not had any problems breezing through the game on the strength of the Guardsman's set alone, using other pieces of equipment to offset the resistance issues. But yeah, the Guardsman set is a fantastic set to be running. I didn't run it in this particular instance because I knew that would be really easy and it would skew my view of the soldier. So I didn't run the Guardsman's set to exemplify this, in case you don't believe me. I did not transfer a complete set over. This is, everything I've got here. And then this is all the other equipment that I've, been getting with this character. These are the things that I have in transfer. I don't think there's anything. I think I might have one Guardsman piece. I thought I had the hammer lying around somewhere at some point. But I don't have any of the Guardsman's set in transfer. I have not used the Guardsman's set with this character because I didn't want to skew my view of the character. Using the Guardsman set would have made it way too easy, and I would have had an inflated view of how this character plays in the early to mid-game. But since you probably aren't going to be looking to make a video on this particular single mastery character, if you want to use the Guardsman set to really blast through the early part of the game, go for it. It's a fantastic set and will easily get you to level 50 with a bit of proper leveling and just awareness. So you've got the Guardsman set, of course. You've got all these different monster infrequent drops. Like I said, the flesh-warped trolls drop stuff. There have been various bosses that drop stuff. The Shambler in the Underground Passage drops a an amulet, that increases something of soldiers. I think it's Force Wave, but I can't remember off the top of my head. And there's Mogara. She drops something. She drops an amulet as well that increases something out of the soldier. You've just got all these different monster infrequents. A lot of monster infrequents throughout the game boost soldier skills. So you're not going to have any kind of shortage of soldier monster infrequents if you're looking for that. But yeah, it's a great introduction to Grim Dawn if you're trying to get a friend to play this. And so far, I've been pleasantly surprised with how smooth this experience has been, and I'm just going to put an asterisk on this. Most of my single mastery characters will not be this smooth. I'm just telling you right now, there will be some that'll come close. There will be one that will match, which will be the Arcanist. I very specifically expect the Arcanist to roughly match the soldier in terms of ease of use and a generally pleasant time, with the sole exception of having an issue with the ethereal faction in general. But the soldier's been a great time, and actually, one thing I forgot to talk about, which I almost didn't talk about at all, was devotions. Now, when you're playing a single mastery soldier, there are a very limited amount of viable perimeter constellations. Now, I already know what constellations I personally am going to be going for at this time. There will be variations with different builds, but I'll talk about those at level 100 level. So, knowing that I'm going for Markovian's Bastion as a set includes a shield, so I knew I would be using shields. I've been using shields the whole time, and you can see I haven't really had a problem with my damage output, at least at this point in time. The first thing I went for, I rushed Assassin's Blade, and that was primarily for the Assassin's Mark. I want this to be upgraded as much as possible, because, and this is something that I like to mention occasionally, because people often forget, most bosses, most heroes, and most nemesis all have like a 35-ish% physical resistance, just default. So, Assassin's Mark is very, very important. First thing I got was this. I absolutely rushed this. It takes 5 devotion points to get to this. You slap it on Blitz. Run with that. This is huge. Okay? Now, when I said 4 perimeter constellations that are really viable for single mastery soldier, I'm talking about these 3 here. Obelisk of Menhir, Azaraka the Eternal Sands, the Unknown Soldier, and Oleron. I personally, with this particular run, I'm going to be going into Oloran and the Obelisk of Menhir. Now you'll notice that I'm specifically going for the Obelisk of Menhir first. This is for survivability purposes. The Obelisk of Menhir, 4 shields. You know, you've got increased armor. You've got all of these delightful items. Retaliation, which will work really well with Counter-Strike. We've got shield boosts. We've got armor absorption out the wazoo. Actually, this is a huge amount of armor absorption. I'm not sure you understand, but this is a pretty substantial amount of armor absorption to really exemplify Scaled Hide, which is the most convenient form of armor absorption that you have access to, is 20% armor absorption. You have to specifically build Scaled Hide. If you don't want to build, you know, you just want things to pick up off the ground and slap on there, you have the 8% out of the Ancient Armor Plate. So just having, by default, just as part of your constellation, 18% armor absorption is pretty huge. The freeze duration reduction is also really nice, especially if you're a single player character. This is quite huge in a very literal sense. And then finally, you've got Stone Form, which is a 15% chance on block. You don't even have to assign this to anything. It just helps keep you from dying. You've got damage absorption, reduction in poison and bleeding durations, increased retaliation, and all for completely free. You don't have to assign this to anything. You don't need a skill set up, I'm pretty sure. You do, I'm sorry. Menhir's Bulwark, though. That's an easy click there. No problem. I had a brain fart. I don't remember why. I don't know why I didn't realize. Hello? Anyways. Brain farts aside, yeah, slap this on Menhir's Bulwark, you're running off to the races. No problemo. If you're, obviously you can use Ulrun's Rage instead if you have that, or Menhir's Will, but absolutely fantastic time. Now once I finished the Assassin's Blade, I went into the Tortoise, specifically so I could grab Turtle Shell here, because I find this really useful overall. It's just a straight up damage absorption shield. It really helps. It's a beautiful skill. And you'll notice I bound this to Overguard, and that's because typically I'll use Overguard when I'm at about half health. Anyways, my gameplay earlier was sloppy because I was talking and I wasn't fully focused on it, but that's beside the point. But, you know, slap this on Overguard, you're having a really magical time. It is actually, I'm probably at some point will swap this, because if this is, considering this is a 15% chance on block, probably this would be better on Overguard at that point. Actually, I should probably switch this now that I'm thinking about it, so I don't forget, because I will forget. So just slap this on Menhir's Bulwark, automatically activates, have a nice day. Then I went for the Bull. This is primarily for Bull Rush for extra damage, internal trauma damage. It's just a wonderful time. So you've got that. I put this specifically on Cadence because Cadence is every third strike, which I knew was going to be consistent. Blitz has a cooldown, so while, yes, I can guarantee that it would, you know, hit and everything, Cadence is every third strike, so I've got a decent chance of triggering this. And furthermore, I wanted Assassin's Mark on Blitz because Blitz actually, if you have a shield equipped, which I happen to in this case, Blitz actually hits twice, and I want to exemplify this. Is there any dummies around here? There should be. Where are the dummies here? I cannot remember for the life of me. Alright, we're just going to have to go somewhere else for the dummies then? Okay. Because I can't remember where the dummies are here. Probably because I really can't focus right now for some unholy reason. We're going to go to Homestead because they're very convenient dummies there. I know there's dummies in Devil's Crossing and I know where they are, but this is just a lot more convenient for me. But I want you to pay attention. You'll notice 2 numbers showed up there, right? It hits twice. Cadence hits every third attack. So you have to crit on the third attack to get Assassin's Mark to trigger with Cadence. But with Blitz, with 2 strikes, you've actually got a decent chance of critting on at least one of them. I believe, technically speaking, the crit chance is the same, and if you crit with one, you crit with both. I'm pretty sure that's how that works. I have not yet seen it not crit twice in a row, but, you know, that's neither here nor there. No, actually, I just got a single crit strike with the other one not being... Okay, so it does actually work that way. I've just not been paying enough attention to my numbers. Which is fair enough. There's a lot of numbers flying around on the screen typically when you're playing this. Yeah, I just got a single crit and then a regular damage after that. And of course you could see the third internal trauma damage happening. So yeah, they are 2 separate crits like I thought they were. So yeah, you have actually a better chance than with Cadence at triggering an Assassin's Mark with Blitz, which is why I slapped it on here in the first place. I just doubted myself for some unholy reason. But my basic process was Assassin's Blade Tortoise for this. So this was first because I wanted to level this up as quickly as possible to really, get that physical resistance reduction Assassin's Mark as high up as quickly as possible. Next was Tortoise, so I could get Turtle Shell, which would help my survivability. Third was the Bull. At this point, my damage was starting to fall off, and I was leveling up Cadence. Slap this on Cadence, we're having a really good time. Next up was Shield Maiden. This was to boost my shield everything, right? To increase my block chance. This is going to be fairly important for Stone Form in the future, and eventually Targo's Hammer, which is also pretty potent and something I intend on getting as well. I'll talk about that more when I get to it. And now I'm going for the Lizard, because again, I want to try to get into Obelisk of Menhir as quickly as possible so I can get access to Stone Form, because that's going to be really helpful at keeping me alive, along with, of course, the 18% armor absorption here and all these other defensive boosts here. And, of course, the Lizard's increase in health regeneration and healing effects stacks with good old Menhir's Bulwark, so that's going to be a 21% increase to my healing effects, which is obviously pretty huge. I'm going to be very difficult to kill, and that's kind of the intention. Once I've finished the Lizard, I intend on going into the Harvestman's Scythe here for a couple of specific reasons. First off, you'll notice I have 9 blue, I need 15 blue for the Obelisk of Menhir. I need 6 more points. This gives me 4, granted, which will put me at 13. This will actually push me slightly over at 16, but that's, whatever. But it also gives me 3 purple, which is going to be very important because I need 20 purple for Olrin. Yeah, that's a lot of purple. But this will be a really nice start. This also increases my energy regeneration, which is pretty hugely important. My movement speed, which is going to be useful for Shattered Realm later on. We've got an increase in health and energy here, more movement speed. Again, the energy, yay. Health is really nice as well. And an increase in healing effects by 10%, plus 4% physique, which will stack with, as I mentioned before, that will stack with the military conditioning, meaning even more physique, which means we'll get even more HP without having to actually put any attribute points into that. A Harvestman's Scythe. The increase in cunning is nice. The increase in spirit is really just going to make sure that I don't have to put more attribute points into spirit to use jewelry. More of a fail-safe, I see it as, than anything else. Health regeneration, energy regeneration. The energy regeneration is particularly key here. Again, not putting extremely few points into spirit. Like I said, I think I've only put about 3 points into spirit. Means this energy regeneration is going to be huge. And then finally, flat energy regeneration, flat health regeneration, a percentage increase on health and energy. It's just a magical time, and this is going to be pretty huge for me for all the reasons I just mentioned. Obviously, you can probably understand the value of the Harvestman's Scythe for a single mastery soldier in this particular instance, but this is also going to set me up with 6 purple, and then I'm going to go, obviously, into the Hammer next. That'll be 4 purple, really nice increases on my armor and damage output. That will put me at 10 purple. Then I can get the Anvil for 5. We're going to be at 15. We only need a few more here. I could go for Targo, but I'm really not going to. First off, because I don't really necessarily... As nice as Shield Wall would be, the problem here is that this is a lot of devotion points to put into a constellation for one yellow that I don't need. I've already got all the yellow I need from all these other constellations, because this requires 8. I happen to have 8. Olrin requires 7. I have 8. I just don't need the yellow from Targo, so we're going to pass right over him. But this is going to put us at 15. If I get really desperate, I could just go for the Owl. This is going to be some core attributes here. We've got some elemental resistance, cheaper skills. We've got plus 30% to all damage. We've got an increase in internal trauma damage and bleeding if I decide to go for that. I don't really intend on going to Ulzad either because I don't need the green. I could go into him. But again, that's a lot of devotion points to be putting into a constellation for essentially 2 purple because I don't need the green. I could also go into the Falcon. Again, that's green that I'm not going to need. I'm just probably going to go into the Owl to clean up the last 5 or so points, get Olrin, and be able to swing both of these very easily. And I'm really not going to have any kind of problems balancing these at all, because once I get Harvestman's Scythe, I can get the Obelisk of Menhir at that point, because I'll have the blue I need. And then from there, I go into Hammer, Anvil, Owl, Olrin. It's going to be magical. And I'll probably check back at next week. This character will probably be at level 75. I'm hoping we'll be at level 75 at minimum. Maybe a little higher, I'm not sure, but We'll see what we can do. But that's where I'm going. This is why I haven't posted any class examinations. I'm actually posting this kind of in replacement of class examinations temporarily. And I also wanted to, for the first time, talk about the early and mid games of masteries and classes, because I've never talked about that before. And I also wanted to talk very seriously about single mastery characters, because now having played the soldier here, I can say some single mastery characters are grossly slept on, but some absolutely live up to the negative hype of being really terrible. The Demolitionist as a single mastery is doing okay for now, but I anticipate that being a rough time in the late game. Again, we'll talk about that more specifically when that character hits level 50. But I just wanted to post this, kind of keep you updated on what I was doing, my thought process, why I haven't posted any class examinations, and hopefully to kind of give you something to look forward to in the future. But with that being said, this has been easily my longest Grim Dawn video I've ever done, I think. There's probably a couple of longer ones. But anyways, thank you all very much for joining me. If you liked this, please like and subscribe. If you didn't, please ignore me. If you have any comments, questions, concerns, ideas, suggestions, or requests, please leave them down in the comment section below. I apologize for the length of this. I did want to cover single mastery characters in general in this video. The rest of the single mastery character videos will probably not be as long, except for possibly the ones discussing builds. But again, I'll have multiple things to talk about in those ones, so I'm kind of expecting that. But anyways, ultimately, thank you very much. I need to speak to Amala. I forgot to talk to her after rescuing her father. Anyways, thank you all very much for joining me. Yeah, have a great 24 hours.